All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Premiere Pro Masterclasses. The first thing we're going to be starting to take a look at, as you guys know, the next set of courses is all going to be pre-fundamentals. So we're not even diving into the fundamentals of editing. We're just simply learning how this editing program even works. And the first thing we need to learn in order to learn how this editing program Premiere Pro works is the UI. So in this specific course, we're going to be diving into the UI. We're going to be exploring everything about project files, how you can open up, what happens when you first launch Premiere Pro, your panels, workspaces, so on and so forth. And I'll try and keep this as quick as possible since this information is simple, basic, and you just need to quickly understand it so you can learn how editing works. So with this being said, let's go ahead and dive right in. So if you've got Premiere Pro open right next to you, the first thing that you're going to notice when you first launch Premiere Pro, which I am going to just show you one more time as I launch this completely from scratch. So here it is, completely closed. We'll open this bad boy up, look up Premiere Pro, and we can get the Premiere Pro 2025. So when you first launch Premiere Pro, the first window you get greeted with is called the Projects panel. And this displays your recent projects and allows you to open a new project or open a recent project using a file. So if I clicked on Open Project and I've got a project file, a Premiere Pro project file, I can click it here and open it up. So what should I do here, and what even is a project? A project is kind of like a room that contains all of the edits inside of it. So you can imagine this as the entire warehouse where you're going to be creating all of the edits. And you have to create a new project every time you want to create a new edit. That's just a personal recommendation, just to make sure that everything is clean, organized, and simple. And so in this episode, we're going to be taking a look at how we can create a new project. And once we get into the editing side of things, where everything is located and how we can start using it. So what I first want you to do is click on the blue New Project button. This is going to allow you to create a new project. And when you create a new project, if you ever want to open Premiere Pro again, you're going to find it in your recents, just as you saw before. So guys, if you can see, when I click cancel, you can see my recent projects over here. These are ones which I have created. So if I click on new project, I can either set the project name, change the project location, or add a template. We're not going to be using a template. A template just changes the project settings. We're not going to be changing the location, which is where your project is saved. We're just going to be changing the project name. So for this one, I'm just going to be calling it something like first edit, since it's going to be, containing our first edit. There's also a settings icon if you want to change your project settings. Don't worry too much about that. We just want to create a project. I've already got a project called first edit. So I'm just going to call this first edit 2, and I'm going to click create. And you guys will notice we get prompted with this window. Now, this window is called the import window. And what I just want you to do is skip it. What was this window that we just passed? It's a window which is used to import the footage that you want into the edit. And you might be wondering, well, Joseph, where am I going to start the edit if I don't import any footage? My friend, we're going to take care of all that inside of editing so that you don't have to do any hassle. One thing I want to start off this entire course by saying is editing, unfortunately, has a lot of things which you're not going to be using. Okay, so in Premiere Pro especially, as we mentioned in the intro, we're simply learning this program so that we can move on to After Effects and start to learn the high-end animations. And unfortunately, Premiere Pro has a lot of workspaces and panels and stuff like this that you won't really be using. And I'm talking from 7 years of editing experience. There's stuff in here that I've never used before. Never. Not once. And I've worked with a lot of clients. So I just wanted to let you know, you don't have to learn everything in Premiere Pro. You just have to learn the things which you're going to be using. And you have to be very good at the things which you're going to be using. So what exactly are we going to be using? Well, first of all, how do we edit? Editing, just like a car factory, is split into different sections. So just like inside of a car factory, you have a section that paints the car, a section that builds the car, a section that tests it. Inside of editing, you've got a section that's made for editing, a section made for color, and a section made for audio. Now, what are these sections made up of? They are made up of things we call panels. And panels in editing are just basically a window that contains a certain function, like the effect controls panel, which allows you to control effects, or like the projects panel, which allows you to manage and import project files. These panels just contain a certain function, and there are a ton of panels, and Adobe has been so kind as to organize them in things we call workspaces. Let me quickly break this down because it is getting a bit confusing. If we go over to Windows, we can see a button called Workspaces. And when we click on it, you can see all these different workspaces. Now, inside my Windows tab, I can see all of these, and all of these are my panels. So the audio clip mixer is an audio clip panel. The audio meters is a panel, which is actually this one over here, which you can see, which allows you to track your audio. And the way that you can see each one is by just clicking on it, and it's going to be highlighted in blue like so. Now, you might be wondering, Joseph, there is a lot of panels here. How do we learn these? As I mentioned before, you are not going to be using these. Actually, you're probably not going to be using 80% of them. I myself only use 20%. And We're going to be going through them in this specific course. But the first thing you need to learn about is all of these panels have different functions, and all of them can be used differently. Like, for example, the audio meters can be used to track audio. Now, here's my quick question. If you were an editor and you wanted to do some color grading and you wanted to color grade some footage, are you going to be using the audio meters? Probably not, because you're focused on color grading the footage. So for that reason, Adobe has separated them into workspaces. They have put all of the color panels in the color workspace, all the editing panels in the editing workspace, and all the audio panels in the audio workspace. And when we click on workspaces, we can see all panels, which is a workspace that shows us all of the panels available in Premiere Pro, which you guys will just see as it loads in right now. And you guys can see it gets very confusing. Our second workspace is the assembly workspace, which is a workspace made for importing footage, which I have never used before. So we're not going to be using this. Don't even worry about it. We could do this in the editing workspace. Speaking of the, let's talk about the audio workspace. The audio workspace has all the panels related to audio, things like essential sound, properties, so on and so forth. You're going to be learning about all of these in later courses, so don't worry too much about these. You also have workspaces like captions and graphics, which is workspaces specifically dedicated to subtitles and creating graphics. And these contain all the panels related to creating graphics and everything you need to know about creating text styles and so on. We're also going to be spending some time in this, so don't worry too much about it. You also have the color workspace, which is specifically made for color grading. And then you also have the editing workspace. And the editing workspace is a workspace made for you to do your editing. Now, with this being said, your workspace is probably going to look a little bit different than mine. That is because I have changed the layout of this workspace. So all I'm going to do is head over to Window and go down to Workspace and go down to Reset Saved Layout, which is going to reset my workspace, which brings me to my second point. Inside of your workspaces, you've got all these different panels, right? Which we're going to talk about just a bit and exactly what they do. But you can actually customize them and you can move them around and undock them and place them in different places of your program based on your preferences. So I'll be showing you guys how I place my UI and how I've done it for the last 6 or 7 years and how I've done this whole thing with editing. And it's basically been the easiest way for me to do it. That's the most efficient UI placement I've discovered after 6 years, and I think it's really, really solid. So I highly recommend you guys check it out. But with this being said, before we dive into the UI, we first need to understand what these panels are about. And if you're feeling like there's a lot of information right now, there isn't. I'm just trying to deeply explain every single thing, which once again, as I mentioned before, you don't need to know everything about Premiere Pro. You just need to know how to use it. So you could basically take this course with a grain of salt. As long as you know how to complete our actionable step at the end, you're going to be good to go. So don't even worry about it. And Premiere Pro isn't even that important for you as an editor. After Effects is the big deal, okay? So take it easy for now. So what are the panels that are on the screen right now? Well, the first panel that we can see is the program panel. And this panel is used to view what is happening in our edit. Question, where is our edit? Where does our editing happen? That's right under it. That's the timeline panel. In the timeline is where all of these different panels come together to create our edit. So the timeline panel is exactly where we do our editing. And the program panel is where we see the edit which we are making inside of the timeline in real time or live. So if we're creating an edit in the timeline and we want to see it, we can go over to our program panel, click space, and we can watch through the edit which we are making. Now to the left of it, I've got a bunch of different panels. I've got my source, which allows me to watch my raw footage. I've got my effect controls, which allows me to basically control the properties of clips, like their position, scale, rotations, and so on, and all the effects that I add to my clips over here. I've got my audio clip mixer, which we're not going to be using, so I'm going to right click and close panel. As I mentioned, guys, you can close certain panels and you can undock them based on what you're going to be using. And I've got my metadata, which I'm also going to be closing. Now, bottom under that, we've got my project panel. I'll do a quick review at the end, so don't even worry about it. My project panel over here allows me to import footage and bring footage into Premiere Pro. This is kind of like your big bin where you can have all your footage. And inside of here, you can also right click and create new bins, which are kind of like folders like that. And I can double click inside of them and open it up. It's almost like a folder. And then I can also close that panel. So my project panel allows me to import these assets, import everything into my project files, and start using them in my edit. So as I mentioned real quick, right? The program panel is where we can preview and view our edit. The timeline panel is where we can see our edit and start doing our edit. The effect controls is where we apply our effects and control our edit. The source is where we preview the raw footage, and the project panel is where we import our assets. The media browser, we're not going to be using that, so let's close that panel. Graphic templates, we're not going to be using that. Libraries, not using that. Info, not using that. Effects, we're going to be using that. Markers, no. History, no. The effects panel allows us to access all of the effects which are available inside of Premiere Pro. So I could search up something like transform over here, and I'm going to get the transform effect. You guys can see that. And also to the right of it, you've got your editing tools, and your editing tools panel hosts all the editing tools and all the tools which you can be using to, which you're going to be using to actually edit, inside of this program. So with that being said, that is pretty much all these panels. The properties, by the way, just controls the properties of a clip, which you guys will see. If you are feeling like you are a bit confused and you don't really understand what how everything's working, and you're wondering why is Joseph going through these so quickly, it's because you're going to see how all this stuff works when we start adding in footage and applying everything. Okay, so don't worry too much about it. Let's do a quick revamp. You've got program, which allows you to preview your edit. Timeline is where the editing happens. Project files is where you import your project files and bring them into your timeline. Effects is where you can search up for effects. Effect controls is where you can control the effects that you've got. These are your editing tools, and these are your properties. So just quickly review these on your own, and just make sure that you have a good grasp of everything that is happening right now. So with this being said, the final thing I want to do in this quick course is I just want to rearrange these so that we are more comfortable with them. The timeline, which is where you're going to be doing most of your editing, is going to take up most of the space. So let's go ahead and place it right here. Your audio meters, which just shows you how loud your audio is going to take up a little space. So let's place it on the right side. Your effects over here should probably be on the top right. The reason for this is because we're constantly going to be using our effects. Now, if you're wondering what the heck just happened, let me quickly do that again. So the way that moving things happens with panels is you can go over to your title and click and hold down and move this thing around, and you have these boxes generate. So inside of my program box, if I want to place this as part of my programs, I can just drop it in the middle, and now I can use my scroll wheel or click to switch between these like tabs, kind of like Chrome tabs. But if I want to place it to the left of it, then I just drag it over to here, and you can see my program becomes on the right and the effects becomes on the left. So I'm going to place it inside of my properties, and then I'm going to make my program just a bit bigger so we can preview things a lot better. So I've got my effects in the top right, project files in the bottom left. I'm going to make this a bit smaller, and my effect controls needs to be relatively big because I'm going to be using it to control my edit. So quick revamp of everything that we just covered in this course. When you first open a Premiere Pro project, you can either launch a new project or open a previous one. My recommendation is to launch a new project for this specific edit. You have different panels inside of editing, which have different functions inside of them. And all of these panels belong to different workspaces. Adobe has basically combined the panels which are related to each other in specific workspaces. And they have done that for editing, color, audio, and graphics, and a bunch of different ones. The main ones we're going to be using are editing, color, and audio. And for our editing UI, this is kind of the placement that we go with. Your effect controls hosts all the effects that are inside of Premiere Pro. Your timeline, which is where you do your editing, is down here. Your toolbar for all the editing tools you've got is over here. Your project files are over here. You can preview your edit over here, and your effect controls are in the top left. So with this being said, the best way you can understand these is by starting to kind of bring in some footage and starting to do some edits, which we're going to be doing in future courses. But before we do this, we first need to understand how we can even create an environment to bring footage in and how the timeline even works. And these are the bare bone fundamentals of editing. So once we understand what every window is responsible for, we now need to understand what and how we can use the timeline, and what even are sequences and how we can use them, which is exactly what we're going to be covering in the next course. So with this being said, guys, I am going through these quickly because you're going to learn most of this stuff when you start applying it. Once again, experience is a lot more important than knowledge. So don't worry too much about this for now. Let's go and dive into our next course, in which we're going to be covering sequences and timelines.